Clint Eastwood destroys a reporter. What happened next will leave you speechless. Reporter Jason Hall had built his career on trying to outsmart and corner high-profile figures. But today, he found himself in front of someone who would make his toughest interviews look like child's play. Jason's eyes flickered toward Clint Eastwood, sitting with unshaken composure at the press conference, his iconic weathered face framed by the dimly lit stage. The veteran actor was no longer just a Hollywood legend. He was a symbol of strength, resilience, and unspoken wisdom. But Jason had a job to do, and he had a plan to break the myth. Jason had made a name for himself by challenging stars to expose their flaws, but Clint was not the type to be rattled. Clint's deep-set eyes, hard as granite, held more than just years of acting prowess. They held the strength of a man who had fought wars on screen and real battles in life. Jason's mission today was clear: to challenge Clint on his beliefs about the changing entertainment industry, his outdated approach to filmmaking, and his stance on modern societal issues. Jason believed Clint was a man stuck in the past. But the reporter had no idea what was about to unfold. Clint, sitting at ease, his back slightly arched, exuded an air of quiet authority. Unlike many Hollywood figures, he didn't seek the spotlight, but when the lights did turn on, the room couldn't help but be drawn to his undeniable presence. Jason's turn came. He took a deep breath, stood up, and adjusted his mic, preparing for a moment that he hoped would go viral. As he locked eyes with Clint, there was an undeniable tension in the air. It was a moment Jason had been waiting for, one that would define his career. The audience waited with bated breath. "Mr. Eastwood," Jason began, a slight edge of arrogance in his voice, "you've had an incredibly long career, but these days, your style of filmmaking has been called old-fashioned by critics. Don't you think you're out of touch with the younger generation of moviegoers? Your recent projects have struggled to resonate with modern audiences. Can you honestly say you're still relevant in an era where people want fast, flashy entertainment?" The room fell silent. Jason's words hung in the air, and Clint didn't flinch. He remained as calm as ever, a slight raise of his brow the only hint that he was about to respond. The weight of the room shifted from the spotlight onto Clint, and everyone's eyes were now fixed on him, waiting for his answer. Clint sat there for a long moment, letting the silence grow heavy. His voice, when it came, was calm but filled with authority. "Let me tell you something, Jason," Clint said, his voice steady. "You think just because you can throw a few buzzwords and flash around your opinions, you've got the world figured out? This business has been around for a long time. It's been through more than a few trends, and I'm still here. That tells you everything you need to know." The audience leaned forward, sensing the change in Clint's tone. Jason felt a bead of sweat trickle down his face, his confidence wavering. "I don't make movies to be relevant. I make them because I believe in them. I believe in telling stories that matter. And if that's old-fashioned to you, maybe that's your problem. The world doesn't need to chase the next trend every few months. It needs stories that stand the test of time." Clint's words cut through the room like a hot knife through butter. The crowd was stunned. Jason hadn't expected this response. He thought he could provoke Clint, make him defensive, perhaps get him to stumble or backtrack. But Clint Eastwood wasn't the type to buckle under pressure. He wasn't the type to be swayed by popular opinion. Jason tried to recover, but his words faltered. "But Clint, your work hasn't changed. People want something new, something fresh. Your approach, your philosophy, has been called a relic. How can you justify being stuck in your ways?" Clint's gaze didn't break as he answered, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Let me tell you, Jason, the truth doesn't change with every new fad. The truth is timeless. And I don't need the world to tell me that. I've been in this business long enough to know that it's not about what's hot right now, it's about what endures." His words were a subtle slap in the face, but they weren't aggressive. Clint wasn't the kind to yell or raise his voice. Instead, his words were sharp, each one cutting deeper into the heart of the argument. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not here for approval, and I don't need to conform to whatever's popular this week. I'm here because I'm passionate about my craft. And that's something you'll never understand if you only care about what sells right now." Jason stood frozen, his mic still gripped tightly in his hand. The power of Clint's response wasn't in the words alone. It was in the confidence, the conviction, the wisdom that came from a man who had seen it all and stood the test of time. As Clint continued to speak, his presence became even more pronounced. If you're looking for a quick hit, there are plenty of stars who will give you that. But don't expect me to give you anything less than the truth. And that truth is that my movies, my work, are for people who appreciate something real. And you know what, Jason? I'll keep making them for those people, whether you like it or not. Jason, who had prided himself on exposing the flaws of the industry's biggest figures, found himself outmatched. He'd come for Clint Eastwood, thinking he could tear him down with a few pointed questions. But instead, he found himself confronted by a man who had built an empire based on integrity and grit, qualities Jason couldn't begin to understand. As Clint stood up and turned toward the exit, the room stayed silent. Jason had been defeated, but he wasn't the only one. The audience, the media, everyone in the room knew that Clint Eastwood had just given a master class in staying true to yourself and ignoring the noise of the world. Clint's words would resonate long after the press conference ended. It wasn't just a victory for Clint, it was a reminder to everyone in the room that some things, like integrity and authenticity, don't change with time. They're the things that endure. The tension in the room was palpable, and the impact of Clint's words lingered long after his brief exchange with Jason. The media had been expecting a defensive, perhaps even emotional response from the legendary actor. Instead, they had been given something far more powerful, an assertion of confidence that reverberated through the room. Jason, now standing in stunned silence, realized just how deeply Clint's words had cut through the facades the industry had built over the years. The reporters exchanged glances, some with admiration, others with disbelief. It wasn't every day that someone with as much authority as Clint Eastwood stood up, unapologetically, for their craft and personal beliefs. And yet, Clint's response had shaken more than just Jason. It had shaken the very foundation of the entertainment industry's obsession with fleeting trends and constant reinvention. Jason, still holding the mic, tried to gather his thoughts. He had come into the press conference ready to tear Clint down, but now he felt an unexpected sense of respect. Clint's calm composure and unwavering stance had left him not only speechless but questioning the values he had held so dear in his career as a reporter. This was not the type of response he had expected. Jason had thought he was going to uncover some weakness in Clint's armor, but instead, he had been confronted by a man whose strength was built on decades of conviction, not ego. It was Clint's unrelenting dedication to his craft that had set him apart. He hadn't been swayed by the changing tides of Hollywood. He wasn't chasing the next trend or trying to remain relevant by aligning himself with the latest celebrity culture. Clint Eastwood had remained steadfast in his mission to create films that were rooted in authenticity, hard work, and truth. And that, in a world full of fleeting moments and empty gestures, was something rare and invaluable. Jason's voice broke the silence, but it was weak, lacking its former confidence. "Mr. Eastwood," he began, I didn't expect you to come at me like that. But I have to admit, there's something compelling about your approach." Clint didn't respond immediately. He let Jason's words hang in the air, unhurried and unbothered. Instead of diving into another argument or defense, Clint took a moment to look around the room, the weight of the moment settling into his bones. There was nothing he needed to prove to anyone anymore. He had done the work, created the stories, and lived the life that others only dreamed of. When Clint finally spoke again, his voice was calm, but his words were like a force of nature. "You want to know what's compelling, Jason? It's not just about being bold or loud. It's about having the strength to stay true to yourself, no matter how much the world pushes against you. That's what people remember. That's what lasts. Not your latest project, not the next film you make, but whether or not you stayed true to what you believed in." Jason shifted uncomfortably. He had always prided himself on exposing contradictions in public figures, holding them accountable for their actions and words. But here he was, facing a man who had lived out his truth every day of his life, who had weathered the ups and downs of fame, yet never once faltered in his core beliefs. "And let me tell you something else," Clint continued, his gaze sharpening. "It's easy to follow the herd. It's easy to chase after what's in, or what the public thinks they want. But that's not living, Jason. That's just surviving. The real question is, what are you willing to do when the world tells you that you're outdated? Will you bend, or will you stand your ground?" Jason could feel the weight of Clint's words pressing down on him. They weren't just a challenge for him. They were a challenge to anyone in the room who had ever thought of sacrificing their own authenticity for fame, success, or approval. Clint wasn't just talking about the industry. He was talking about life itself. In the eyes of the world, he had every reason to fall in line, to become just another face in the crowd. But Clint Eastwood had never done that, and that was exactly why he had earned his place in history. The reporters in the room, still silent, were watching this exchange unfold, but no one dared to interrupt. Clint had made it clear that the only voice that mattered in that moment was his own, and he wasn't going to allow anyone to detract from the message he was delivering. Hollywood is full of people who try to be someone they're not. They wear masks, play roles off-screen as much as on. But I'm done with that, Clint said, his voice steady. I don't need to be the center of attention. I don't need the accolades. What I need is to create something that means something, something that leaves a mark. Jason swallowed hard, realizing that Clint was right. The industry had become obsessed with instant gratification, superficial fame, and chasing the next viral moment. But Clint had proven that true success didn't come from trends. It came from creating something that resonated, something that lasted beyond the moment. So, you don't feel the need to reinvent yourself? Jason asked, his voice quieter now, as if he had finally grasped the depth of Clint's message. Clint shook his head. I don't need to reinvent myself, Jason. I've already done the work. The question is, are you going to do the work, or are you just going to keep running after the latest shiny object? Jason had no answer. The weight of Clint's words had settled on him, and he realized that this wasn't just about Hollywood or movies. This was about life, about sticking to your values and beliefs when the world tells you to change. Clint Eastwood had spent decades in the public eye, but it wasn't just his fame that made him relevant. It was his unwavering commitment to staying true to who he was, and that was a lesson that would resonate with him long after the interview ended. The room remained silent for what felt like an eternity after Clint's words hung in the air. Jason stood there, his mind racing, processing everything Clint had just said. The cameras continued to click, but the energy in the room had shifted. What had started as a heated confrontation had now turned into a moment of deep introspection, not just for Jason, but for everyone in the room. Clint Eastwood had not only defended himself, but he had also dismantled the very foundation of the shallow and superficial narratives that had been perpetuated in the media. Jason, still holding the microphone, found himself at a loss for words. His usual sharpness had vanished. The tables had been turned. Clint had come into the room with a quiet, unshakable confidence that no one could have predicted. What was meant to be an interview had turned into a profound life lesson, and it was clear that Jason's perspective had shifted. For a moment, Jason was no longer just a reporter. He was a man who had just been reminded of the importance of authenticity, humility, and standing firm in one's beliefs. Clint, now leaning back in his chair, observed Jason struggle with a quiet, knowing gaze. He didn't say another word. There was no need to. The message had been delivered. It wasn't for Clint to change Jason's mind. It was for Jason to come to that realization on his own. The room, which had been filled with the buzz of cameras and whispers, was now eerily still. No one moved. It wasn't just Clint's powerful words that had left everyone stunned. It was the way he had carried himself with such grace and integrity. He wasn't interested in grand gestures or flashy words. His response was simple, direct, and profound. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jason cleared his throat. He looked around at the reporters who had been watching this entire exchange, all of them now waiting for him to respond. He knew he had been bested. He knew Clint had made his point loud and clear. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure how to respond. He didn't know what to say to someone who had just dismantled the entire narrative he had tried to build. Clint, sensing Jason's discomfort, gave him a slight nod, as if acknowledging the moment. "You'll figure it out," Clint said softly, his tone still firm but not unkind. "You're smart enough." Jason nodded, but there was no immediate reply. What could he say? What could he possibly say after such a powerful statement? His questions had been aimed at exposing Clint's supposed flaws, but instead, he had been forced to confront his own. Clint's words had not only shattered his preconceived notions about Hollywood and the media, but they had also left him questioning his own motivations. Had he been so caught up in the chase for sensationalism that he had forgotten what truly mattered? As Clint's words echoed in his mind, Jason knew this would be a defining moment for him, not just as a reporter, but as a person. He had come into this interview with a mission, to prove that Clint Eastwood was no longer relevant, that his time had passed. Instead, Clint had proven that his relevance wasn't determined by the industry's ever-changing trends. It was rooted in his ability to stay true to himself, to resist the pressure to conform, and to lead by example. Clint stood up, straightening his jacket as he prepared to leave the room. He looked around at the stunned faces of the reporters. There was no need for applause. There was no need for accolades. The message had been made. Clint Eastwood had spoken. And everyone in that room knew they had witnessed something far more significant than a simple press conference. They had witnessed a man who had lived his life on his own terms, who had refused to let the world dictate his path, and who had shown, with nothing but quiet strength, that authenticity and integrity would always outlast the fleeting trends of the entertainment industry. As Clint made his way to the door, Jason's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Eastwood," he called out, his voice barely above a whisper. Clint stopped in his tracks but didn't turn around.
"Yeah."
Jason hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to continue. Finally, he simply said, "Thank you for reminding me of what really matters." Clint gave him a slight smile before exiting the room. "You're welcome, kid. Take care." The reporters, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, began to stir. Some exchanged glances, some nodded in silent acknowledgement, and others simply watched as Clint left the room. The conversation would continue, but it would never be the same. Everyone had been changed by that brief but impactful moment. As the media packed up their things and left the press room, Jason remained behind, staring at the empty chair where Clint had just sat. His mind was still processing the gravity of everything that had just happened. He had come in with a mission, but now he had a greater understanding of what it truly meant to be authentic, to stand firm in your beliefs, and to be unapologetically yourself in a world that often demands conformity. Clint Eastwood had come to that press conference not just to respond to a question or defend his legacy. He had come to remind everyone in that room, and everyone watching, that true strength comes not from winning arguments, but from living a life that speaks louder than words. And as Jason left the room, he knew that Clint's words would stay with him forever, guiding him in his career, in his life, and in his quest to always remain true to himself.